Welcome to the Chanakya Leadership Series, where the leadership gets the right guidance at the right time. We have a situation from Neeraj, one which has often been encountered by organizations moving to Agile from a conventional way of working. Let's explore this with our experts, JV and Vishu. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we have a situation here. Trailblazers Inc. is a leading provider of healthcare solutions to customers worldwide. They are headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They have a development center in Bangalore with 400 engineers and a small center in Cambridge with about 50 engineers. Trailblazers have decided to embark on an agile transformation journey. Their SVP of engineering, Mike Simpson, personally kicked off the initiative targeted at improving predictability, reducing cycle time, and improving customer responsiveness. Mike wants Neeraj, who is a VP of engineering at the Bangalore Development Center, to drive this initiative with Scrum as the primary approach and complete the transformation within the next 1.5 years. Neeraj approaches you as an agile coach to help him define and implement a program that will ensure the success of this initiative. So, how will you help Neeraj as an agile coach? Any thoughts, JV?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation that most of us have encountered when we go through an agile transformation. So first of all, Neeraj needs to understand the program objectives overall. Set in place a set of program objectives based on what Mike has defined to him, right? Mike has looked at improved predictability, improved responsiveness, and reducing cycle time. Now, basically, Neeraj needs to understand where is the company today in terms of these parameters. Where does Mike want the company to be in terms of these parameters 1.5 years from now, so that he's able to actually define something that's more realistic, meaningful, achievable over the next 1.5 years, right? That's the first step that he needs to start with.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a good first step. So, know where you are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, then start putting together a roadmap and then track it, right? Yeah. So, once this is done, how does he go about implementation, right? Since Mike mentioned Scrum as the way to go, should Neeraj send a few people for CSM certification, right? And get them certified and then, go forward? Will that work, JV?
I think this is one thing that many organizations don't necessarily get it right, when they go through an agile transformation. They send a lot of people to a program. I've seen situations where 150 people go through a CSM program. Company organizes an in-house CSM program for a lot of people. While by itself, the training is an absolutely important element in this whole exercise. Thinking that training will solve the problem and thinking that once you get trained, you'll go back and implement what you learned in the program, especially in an agile context, doesn't generally work, right? You need a more holistic approach that looks at the overall program objectives, where the teams are and things like that. And then chalk out a plan that involves a lot more systematic and holistic approach.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So, any initial thoughts, Vishu, and recommendations on if you have a specific approach in mind, it might help Neeraj better.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with what JV said. Because this being an enterprise-wide transformation, it requires a holistic approach. So Neeraj can look at some of those possibilities. For example, we use an approach called ABC approach, where A stands for assessment, B stands for blueprinting, and C stands for coaching. So if you look at that, assessment is about knowing the organization status right now. So we use certain tools like the instruments and interview people at various levels and various roles in the organization, and come out with some kind of the findings or where the gaps are, and based on that input, we co-create with the right stakeholders in the organization the blueprint, which is like a roadmap about this initiative. How should they go about addressing each of these? That drives then the coaching, training, implementation aspects. So we see this holistic approach helps to then drive this program in a comprehensive way. So Neeraj can really look at some of these approach to drive.
But interesting, sometimes this word holistic gets talked about so much, right? But I think from whatever you're saying, I think there's a bit of a meat to it, right? It's not just a buzzword.
Yeah, that's
right?
a framework.
There's a framework with which you approach it. Okay, good, yeah. That's interesting, and it also sounds very easy, just ABC. How easy can that be? So is there a role for senior management leadership in this case?
Absolutely. In fact, we call this approach as a sandwich approach. That means both bottom up and top down.
All right, yeah.
Many times you have seen organizations tend to look at, let's address the team level issues and let Agile happen.
They are delivering anyway.
Yeah. We see that leadership level is a 50% challenge. In terms of governance, measurements, the way they need to change their style from a command control to more facilitative leadership. So a lot of culture change aspect also needs to happen. Even thinking approach needs to change at a leadership level. And leadership needs to demonstrate their commitment and influencing the team for this change. So they have a very significant role in the transformation.
And probably training and coaching is involved in this case as well, for the leadership as well. Absolutely.
So you talked about this change in leadership style, right? Okay. So if they become facilitator, will they lose control?
Not really. In fact, that's the way they can harness much more of the bottom of the pyramid, rather than they thinking and then the bottom does kind of a mindset.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
So,
so maybe that's where the training for them, including how their style of working as a change will help them realize or allay some of their fears about lose control. Okay, that sounds really comprehensive, Vishu. So it brings me to one important aspect of this case, right? Okay. While engineers are largely based out of Bangalore, there is a set of people sitting in the US, right? And with probably a few leaders there as well, right? How does Neeraj handle this aspect? Any thoughts from you, JV?
It's probably Neeraj sitting in India. This is probably the biggest challenge for him, especially because of the time zone differences, and also the fact that the leadership, real senior leadership team, is sitting in the US, whereas the whole engineering team is sitting in India. Majority of the engineering team. First, we need to figure out, since there are 400 engineers in India and 50 in the US, we need to figure out the composition of the teams. Is it teams that are largely co-located in each of these locations, with all the roles kind of available for each team in each location? Or is there a case, exceptional situations where teams are distributed? Some roles could be played by somebody in the US, like for example a product owner role or a product manager role being played by somebody in the US and the team is sitting in India. It's possible for situations like that. Sometimes even architects or senior engineers can be sitting in there in some teams. We need to make sure that in those exceptional situations, I'm assuming that a large number of teams are autonomous, right? They have their own set of roles being played by people in India.
At least they should move towards that.
They should move towards that model. But especially in a situation where they are distributed, we need to have working agreements or team norms for teams to work a lot more effectively, right? Cross-functional collaboration, cross-geo collaboration, cross-team collaboration needs to be taken care of. And on top of that, Neeraj also needs to look at constructs such as Scrum of Scrums, Meta Scrums, etc., team working agreements, and so on and so forth, to ensure that collaboration is actually effective. And in addition to that, there's also a need for different layers of planning, levels of planning, right?
Okay.
You need to start with product roadmap level, planning, to portfolio level, at that level, to release level planning, to sprint planning, and so on and so forth, with appropriate metrics and governance mechanisms at each level, right? All of those need to be defined.
And these plans have to feed into each other. So this whole cycle, this whole set of things actually works together in making the whole program and plan meaningful and successful. And to add to all of these, I think when Vishu mentioned about leadership training and coaching and things like that, since a number of leaders are actually based out of the US, you need to make sure that they are also involved in the training and coaching. That's an important element of the whole exercise. So Neeraj shouldn't forget that part. That's very interesting. So there are 2-3 dimensions to what you said, multiple locations. So improve collaboration and use constructs like Scrum of Scrums, Meta Scrums help you to improve collaboration. And different levels of planning will help whole thing move in a coordinated way, right? And finally, make sure the leadership in the teams and leadership in the US are not forgotten when it comes to training.
And appropriate governance and review mechanisms at each level. That's the metrics and things like that.
That's fantastic. So now, let's say Neeraj launches into all of this and everything is happening. Now, how does Neeraj know? This is all kind of working well. Any thoughts, Vishu?
Yeah. In fact, as part of the blueprint, we need to build in
Yeah.
these governance mechanisms.
Okay.
Both about the work as well as how the initiative is running.
Okay.
So Neeraj can really leverage that. What JV mentioned about layers of planning, synchronized mechanisms of governance and metrics feeding into each other, and tying these metrics back into the initiative objective that Mike had
Talked
an
about,
expectation
yeah.
about. So that close the loop with that. So it's not about just adoption or a process kind of measures. It's also about output and outcome measures as part of the measurement system. That will ensure that really the program becomes successful and it then sustains.
And the mindset in this case in terms of governance and reviews needs to be a lot more facilitative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where the management team, as Vishu mentioned
Comes
about
back
the
to the style of
being-
leadership, right? Yeah.
Style of leadership. I think the governance and reviews very often, in conventional working tends to be command control driven, right? Whereas, what we like in an agile setup is facilitating the teams and saying why, if they are not able to meet a commitment, are not able to meet a specific metric or a measure, what could be contributory factors, and how can the management and leadership
Help the process,
the
right?
process.
Yeah.
That's
So essentially
really
then Neeraj needs to ensure setting up of these mechanisms.
Okay.
That becomes his pivotal point to drive this initiative.
and the leaders are coached in doing it.
There's a whole lot of inputs and recommendations from you for Neeraj. So let me summarize a few key aspects, right? Firstly, define specific objectives for this initiative based on Mike's overall directive, right? And track the program on an ongoing basis with respect to these objectives and align metrics at different levels. Secondly, use a holistic approach such as the ABC approach that Vishu described. Thirdly, ensure senior leadership team at both locations have bought into the initiative and are fully committed to it. It may mean executive sessions and coaching for them to understand their role in the new context. Finally, use of constructs such as different levels of planning, scrum of scrums and meta scrums for effective cross-team collaboration and including across locations. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's a
Good. So thanks Vishu and JV. I'm sure leaders like Neeraj would have found this session highly educative. Thanks for joining us.